Hello, everybody. This is Rick Manning, President of Americans for Limited Government, here reporting today on the latest on Biden's COVID craziness. Yesterday when I reported, it was before Biden made his speech. It was before he announced that he was going to try to throw 30 million people out of work. And it was before there was any real, the data, the information was pretty sketchy. Well, let's tell you what's happened and what this speech actually means. Yes, I said the word 30 million people out of work. That's about how many people would be subject to being fired amongst the 100 million people who work for employers who are 100 employees or more. So, and because these employees would tend to be younger employees, since they're the younger people tend to be less vaccinated, the estimate is about 31% of the 100 million would be subject to being fired for not having vaccination. Of those, a preponderance, a disproportionate number would be African American. Why? African Americans are less likely to be vaccinated than others. As a result, you would have a disproportionate number of African Americans thrown out of the workforce, being fired from their jobs because they didn't want to get a vaccine. Recognizing that the vaccine itself, with the African American community in particular, with the history of the experimentation that the CDC did on African Americans as related to venereal disease in the 40s, 50s, 60s, and 70s, yes, African Americans are rightly concerned about being experimented on, about taking vaccines. They have a cultural and a rightful cultural concern about the government saying, we're from Washington and we're here to help. And as a result, this will have a disproportionate impact on African Americans. And I think creates a civil rights suit that is unparalleled, where the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice will have to defend singling out, disproportionately impacting African Americans. And that will create all sorts of havoc on the left. I think they've made a major mistake. Let me talk about what that 30 million people means in real terms. And during the pandemic, the height of the pandemic, there was about 25 million people who were unemployed. 25 million people unemployed in late April of 2020. That's how many people the original shutdown of our economy caused to be thrown out of work. Joe Biden, with a stroke of a pen, wants to threaten the jobs of 30 million people on top of the 7.5 million people who are unemployed already. So he's sitting there going, well, gee whiz, I know best. Either do what I say, or we're going to make a recession unlike anything you've ever seen. And that's his response. He's like a petulant child who is sitting there saying, not enough people are doing what I want. I'm going to make them. Well, the answer, Joe, is don't destroy the country in the process, because that's what 30 million people unemployed means. Let's talk about what it means in a practical term. What it means is, at a time when we have a labor shortage, when we have 10 million jobs unfilled, when businesses are crying for labor, when our hospitals and various public health facilities, not just public, health facilities are looking to try to increase the number of people they can help. At that juncture, what do we have? We have Joe Biden saying, yeah, let's fire 30% of your workforce. It's insane. It's insane. At its core, it's insane. You want to know what else is insane? Guess what the Department of Labor is doing today? They've got the OSHA, OSHA under Department of Labor. The throwing 30 million people out of work is based on a faulty reading of OSHA emergency powers, and which will be, I believe, found to be unconstitutional. But this is what the Department of Labor did today. It's really, really, really amazing. They had a ceremony announcing that they were going to put essential workers, COVID essential workers, into the Labor Hall of Fame. The same Labor Department that wants to force the firing of 30% of the essential COVID workers is now, on the next day, is announcing that they're going to put those same workers into the Labor Hall of Fame. As far as I'm concerned, Biden's Labor Department belongs to be in the Labor Hall of Shame, because they're determined to destroy jobs, destroy opportunity, and use OSHA laws as a weapon against Americans who are merely exercising their right to determine whether or not they're going to get a vaccine or not. That qualifies them for the ultimate hall of shame. And they can't cover it up by doing some happy press release about putting COVID essential workers into the Hall of Fame. It's an embarrassment. And the people at the Labor Department who moved forward with that in the wake of what they just announced should be ashamed of themselves and the entire Department of Labor, where I used to work, by the way. I was in the W White House in the Labor Department for the W administration. And so I know a little bit about this. And it's incredible that they would try to throw 30 million people out of work by engaging in coercive tactics and abusing the power of the federal government. And at the same time say, oh, we want to lift up COVID workers. Mind-boggling. Another piece of the action that people aren't aware of, because I was at the Labor Department, I'll tell you a little bit about this. There's about 23 states have their own OSHAs. So California has Cal OSHA, for instance. Nevada has Nevada OSHA. South Carolina has South Carolina OSHA. Why this is significant is because those states, because they have their own OSHAs, enforce the OSHA laws in their states. And it was ostensibly set up so the OSHA laws in the states could be more aggressive than the OSHA laws in states on the federal level. And that's why those state OSHAs were set up. But guess what? The federal government can't enforce the laws in those states. Only the state government enforces the laws in those states. So in states that have a state OSHA, like Tennessee, for instance, in Tennessee, the governor can say very simply, the Tennessee OSHA will not be enforcing this law, this guidance, and it will not be enforced by Tennessee OSHA. And there's not a darn thing that President Biden can do about it. The OSHA, the federal OSHA, is absolutely, their hands are tied. They have no OSHA inspectors in Tennessee, and they have no legal standing in Tennessee. So given that, take a look. We're going to put it up on our website on dailytorch.com. But take a look and see which states have their own state OSHAs, because your elected officials, the very people we're asking you to contact and tell them no vaccine mandates, guess what? Those people can go off and they can say, hey, we've got a state OSHA, and tell the federal government, guess what? You can do whatever you want to do. It's unconstitutional, but it doesn't affect us because we're not subject to federal OSHA. So 22 states are able to opt out, and most of them are very liberal states who likely won't. But the few that are Republican-run states can use that and use it as a means to basically tell the federal government to go pound sand, which is exactly what they need to do. So there are things, I want to tell you this because, in the midst of things, there can be a feeling that it's hopeless, that the things that are being done, that it's all working against you, that they have all the power. They don't have all the power. You have the power. You have the power. By going after the federal legislators on this and making the federal legislators feel the heat against the vax mandate, what will happen is those federal legislators will start going after Biden. We'll start going after the policy. We'll start standing up and co-sponsoring Ted Cruz's legislation that bans vax mandates. They'll start fighting back. The dirty little secret, I think it's been revealed over time, but the dirty little secret is politicians don't lead, they follow. They follow wherever they think the wind is blowing. A lot of times they follow. That's why the establishment media is so powerful, because they hear it in the established media, and if there's nothing pushing back against it, they figure, well, this must be a safe place to be. Well, we need to make being on the side of mandatory vaccines a politically unsafe place to be. And that's why going and doing what we've got down below, right down there, you can see, go on to that link. And if you haven't already, send it to your elected officials. But even more important than even your action to do that, as strange as it may seem, the more important action is to share it with all your friends. We have to broaden this coalition. We have to get it as far and wide as possible. If you have friends at work, if you have people you know are concerned, if you have relatives, get them involved. Give them the opportunity to be part of the winning team here, to be part of the fight to stop the vaccination mandates. You can do that. You can do that. I don't know your relatives. I don't know your friends. You do. I can give you the tools, but we can't do anything that you aren't willing to go off and spread the word and send those tools to others. And if we can get those tools in the hands of the people who are going to be most affected by this, we will have an overwhelming surge of opposition. We've already got over a million emails into elected officials opposing the vaccine mandate. And it's my hope that in the next week, we will double that number, but we can only do it if you take action. So that's one of the things that's there. We can't just sit there and complain. Can't just sit there and say, I wish this wasn't happening. And, 3.5 years before Biden's gone. We have to stop this now. And you have the power to do it by sharing it with your friends. So that's a really, really important point. And once again, it's up on the screen. It's easy to find. So, but what's the next step after that? You say, okay, we've shared it with our friends. We're doing all that. We've even given money to try to spread the word. Well, let me tell you how that money that's being given is being used. We're rolling that into Facebook ads and to other ads to reach people who we don't otherwise have a way to reach. We are transforming your money, any money that you give us, we are transforming that money into actions. And we're getting a huge number of actions that we wouldn't have gotten otherwise. We already have about 10,000 new people who have joined the fight based on those ads. So that is another way that you're helping, because I'm putting those dollars back into the fight. Those aren't dollars that are going to sit here in DC. Those are dollars going to be put out to get more people fighting, to broaden the coalition, and to drive the message to Washington, DC, your state and your local legislators that no vaccine mandates is not tolerable. It is against the Constitution. It's against your rights, and that this is an issue that matters to you in a way that few issues do. Here's what the politicians don't realize. The politicians don't realize that they can get away with all sorts of stuff. And they do. They get away with spending too much money. Why? Because they're spending in Washington, D.C., and interest rates may go up or inflation may occur. But until it becomes something that actually hits your pocketbook in a meaningful way through higher taxes or other actions, most people say, okay, well, I don't like it, but I'm not going to go fight over it. But with this issue, they're telling you that you have to have a vaccine, whether you want it or not. Joe Biden incredibly said yesterday that he's trying to protect the vaccinated against the unvaccinated in the workplace. Folks, that's the most insane statement I've ever heard, because presumably the vaccinated are already protected. Otherwise, why be vaccinated? So, Joe doesn't get much right, but that was so upside down that I think even his staff were scratching their heads over how that worked. But just understand that you are having an impact. The last piece I want to talk about this is understand why Joe Biden did this today, or did this yesterday. Did this yesterday. He did it yesterday because his plan to have a big celebration on 9/11 was shattered by the reality that his pulling out of Afghanistan is costing thousands of lives, has stranded thousands of Americans. And we learned today that his State Department is actually going and has negotiated with the Taliban so that the Americans are trying to get out of the airport in north of Kabul. They're trying to get out. That those Americans are being told, well, if you're married to somebody who's an Afghani, if you're married, if you have children Afghanis, you have to leave them behind. That's what Biden's State Department negotiated with the Taliban. That's why there were only 19 Americans on a flight that was allowed to leave to Doha, that arrived in Doha earlier today. 19. Because unlike Joe Biden, who left thousands of Americans behind, left thousands of our allies behind, unlike Joe Biden, these people said, I'm not leaving my family behind, even if it costs me to die. That is the real Joe Biden Afghan policy. That's what they are doing right now. It is evil. It is beyond anything any of us could have imagined. And it is so callous to life itself that it is almost incredible that they'd try to do it. Now, on the other hand, they've pushed forward legislation that they're trying to get included into the funding bill for the continuing resolution funding bill that would completely change the rules on how to handle refugees when it comes to people from Afghanistan. Taking away all the vetting processes, making certain that anybody who said that they were from Afghanistan would be able to bring anybody from around the world who also said they were from Afghanistan into America. They'd be fast-tracked into getting green cards and eventually being able to actually fast-track to citizenship. And this isn't talking about the people who were actually the ones who were standing in the front lines with our soldiers. This is talking anybody who happened to make it across the border, anybody who happened to get on a plane. And that's about 50,000 of the Afghanistan refugees who are currently here in America fit the category. We don't know who they are. We don't know how they got it. We know how they got here, but we don't know who they are. And yet Joe Biden wants to convey to them a blanket approval, a welcome mat, and not just a welcome mat, but a pathway to citizenship and all the chain migration that goes with it. It's not an earned. They didn't earn it. They didn't earn it by their loyalty to the United States. They didn't earn it by their fight for freedom. They're getting it because they happen to get on. They happen to be one of the lucky people who found their way onto a plane. Joe Biden doesn't want to vet them. Doesn't want to have anybody they want to bring in vetted. That's what the rules would change to. So the same Joe Biden who is agreeing to the Taliban to break up American families in Afghanistan is the same Joe Biden who wants to convey massive amounts of rights and privileges to people who we don't even know who they are here in America. Once again, it's cringeworthy. It makes no sense, but that's Biden America. Let me give you one little other thing. It's off point in terms of Afghanistan. It's off point in terms of COVID-19, but I think it's important. Today, the producer price index came out. You probably didn't hear anything about it. If you did, it didn't really register. 8.3% annual increase for the final goods and services. That's what the increase was for producer price index. That means today, producers for the end product are paying 8.3% more than they did a year ago. That's why the consumer price index, the amount you pay, the amount I pay, is going up so dramatically because the people who make the stuff, the people who produce the stuff, who create this, who do the services, their underlying costs have gone up by 8.3%. Here's the bad news. The bad news is that the way the producer price index is figured is it's a combination adding up the producer price index increase or decrease over the past 12 months. Well, the bad news is the producer price index was not going up very fast under Donald Trump. Donald Trump, inflation was under control. And Donald Trump, the producer price index was averaging in the last 4 months of the year about 0.2%. So of the 8.3% next month, when the 0.2% from August of 20 or September of 2020 gets replaced by the number from September 2021, that will be an increase. There'll be an increase of probably 0.4, 0.6%. So the producer price index of 8.3% today is likely to be a producer price index of 9, 10% by the time we get to the January of 2022, where it's all Biden numbers. That's called systemic inflation. That is long-term and is not temporary, in spite of what some people in the Federal Reserve wish it away with. So understand, we either are going to have dramatically increased prices, or we're going to throw 30 million people out of work. We throw 30 million people out of work, guess what? We have massive unemployment. We have a massive problem on our hands from a human suffering standpoint, all created by Joe Biden. If we, on the other hand, continue along the same path of spending, just spending with no thought whatsoever to how we're going to pay for it. If we pass things like the $3.5 trillion or even $1.5 trillion additional spending, infrastructure spending that's been proposed, if we pass that, that will continue to fuel the inflationary cycle that we're seeing on the producer price index and will hit you in the pocketbook for the foreseeable future. That's just the truth. That's what the government's reporting. I'm not making this stuff up. Look it up, BLS, go to bls.gov. The fact is, our economy is under control. We have a president who wants to destroy the workforce at a time when we're short millions of workers, 10 million workers from the last report, 10 million jobs unfilled. He wants to throw 30 million workers out of the workforce. Many of them are trained doctors and nurses that you can't just replace. He wants to throw them out of the workforce. He wants to throw anybody who doesn't agree with his vaccine policy out of the workforce. That's what he wants to do. Last thing seems to me, Lunch Bucket Joe has forgotten his lunch bucket because he has absolutely gone stir crazy. Sign the petition. Let the politicians know that the vaccine mandate cannot stand. Tell your friends. Together we can win, but we can only win together. This is Rick Manning, Americans for Limited Government. Thank you for listening, and God be with you. God's in control. We just need to do our part right now. So step up, and we will win.